Hello and welcome everybody, this is Roland Hartmann from Graphic in Motion and it is tutorial time again. In this tutorial I want to show you how to create a cool sponge material using Houdini's Copernicus feature. So we will set up MaterialX inside Solaris and then we will create textures to add details inside Copernicus. If you want to grab the project file, you can get it on my Patreon. It will be available in the shop, so you can buy it without a membership, but you can of course also choose the project files membership or the higher tiers here to get access to this project file. And I will also upload it on Gumroad if you prefer Gumroad over Patreon. But now let's check out what I have here. So this is the final scene that I'm going to create. And I will just turn off my renderer for a moment and just take a look at my mesh. So this is the initial mesh that I use. And you see, this already has a very nice structure. I will not go through the creation of this now. If you want to learn that, then please stick around, subscribe to the channel. I may post a tutorial on this later, because currently I'm working on some underwater scenes and I create a lot of underwater assets. So I will do a tutorial series about that. But for now, I want to really concentrate and focus on the material. So if you want to study it on your own, you can of course go to the object level and there you can then see this tree here. And this is the whole, more or less a totally procedural way of creating these kind of things where you can just come in here and change a few values here and then you will get totally different results. But I don't want to do this now because I don't want to destroy the setup that I have here. But this is a very procedural setup that creates these cool structures here. Now let's go back to our stage and let's start with this material. So in my material library, I already have my sponge material, but I will create a new one here. So we start from scratch and therefore I just use a Karma material builder, put it in here and just call it sponge tutorial. And before we do anything here, let's just link this to my mesh. So instead of my sponge material that is now here, I will delete this connection here and I will choose my sponge tutorial and apply it to my sponge object. Now let's prepare the material first of all. I do not have any UVs on this object, so I will use a triplanar projection. And I will use a texture that I will create inside Copernicus. So what I want to use here is a MaterialX triplanar projection node. Here I can load in some files. And as I said, I want to bring in my texture from Copernicus, but it also requires some position. So let's bring in here our position of the object. That is the MaterialX position that I will just wire in here. And I also want to be able to change the tiling. So to do that, I will use a multiply that I will hook in here between, and I want to use a parameter that will then be my scale, and we can label it the same way. And let's actually do it like this, that this is small. And now I can change this. Instead of shader parameter, I can change it to subnet connector and apply it in here, and then we put this into our position. And what I'll be able to do then, if I go up one level, you see, now I have my scale directly here. So I can set this to 1 for now, that we already have a value in here, because then I have these custom controls here, and I do not have to go into the subnetwork each time when I want to change the scale or the height. So that's the first step that I want to do. And I want to use this triplanar projection for my displacement actually, because I do not have anything else. I do not have a colored texture and nothing else. I only want to use this to drive my displacement. So let's do this like so. And I want to actually copy these two nodes here because I also want to create a value for my displacement scale here. So in this case, I do not want to do a vector 3. I want to do a float. And I will put in a 0.05 here. So whatever comes through our parameter, and here I can put in now height, like so, will be multiplied with 0.05, and then it will define our displacement scale. And that makes sense because usually the values have to be quite small to get a good result with the displacement. Now, if you take a look at my object stage, let's quickly do that. I created some colors in here. So let me quickly take a look where it is. It is right here. So I'm using this measure node here. And if I activate this tool, we should see what this is doing. And this is just measuring actually the curvature of this mesh. And then I'm saving this out as a curvature attribute. So I will just copy this name here, curvature, and go back to my material in the stage, because I want to use that to actually create some colors. So let's do that. Let's bring in a geometry property node, because we want to bring in some property values here. And I will just bring in the curvature here. Now I want to create a ramp to feed this into a ramp and colorize it, and put this into my base color for now. So to save a little bit of time, I will just copy over the values of this ramp that I created here. So let's just copy parameter here and then come in here and paste it in. You can create the values on your own if you want. And if we go out now and take a look at our object, then we should already see something here when we turn on our renderer. So let's do that. I will use Karma CPU for now, because it just updates a bit faster. All of these techniques also work with Karma XPU, but for the tutorial, I just use Karma CPU because it just updates and initializes a bit faster. Now you see we have this nice object here with this nice color shading that looks already pretty interesting. But it doesn't look at it like a sponge at all. So let's work on this. First of all, a sponge is not that specular. So we can go to our standard material surface, go into specular and change the settings here quite a bit. I want to make this really rough because sponges are very rough. And I also can turn down the specular intensity quite a bit so that it is pretty flat. The next step is to add a little bit of subsurface scattering. And in this case, I want to set this value to 0.5 or 4, I don't even remember, 0.4. Now I also want to use the same color that I have here for my subsurface color. So let's do that. Let's go in here and let's go to subsurface color. But what I want to do here actually is that I add a little bit more saturation in here. So I will use a color correct node and add it in here before my subsurface. Let's do it like that. And let's just increase the saturation to something like 1.6 maybe. You see, the effect is not that obvious right now, but it will be in a moment, because right now I also want to colorize the radius and I want to lower the scale. So let's put the scale to a value of like 0.1 and let's change the radius. And in this case, I will take a similar color like this purple here. So let's grab this color and I'll just grab this. And now I will increase the saturation a bit. And brightness. Let's take a look what this does. And now I want to reduce this scale even further. So let's see how this looks like. And you see that this color now nicely shines through our object. And I think that this is not too bad. Okay, so my subsurface scattering is in place. The only thing that I have to add now is our displacement map. And that's what I want to do in Copernicus. So let's do that. Let's go up a level and another level. And I will just create a new CopNet and call this, let's copy this name over and add it to it here. So for the tutorial. First of all, I want to use a material preview so that we see what we are working on. A preview material, and I will just use a grid in this case. But I want to increase the divisions quite a bit. So let's say 200 for now. We can increase this later on. Or maybe I will just set it to 400 right away, because I have a lot of displacement detail and I want to be able to see it. Let's turn off the grid here. Now I want to create a null here, because this will actually be the point which I can then feed into my texture. So let's call this out height. This will be my height map. And I will copy the path by selecting it and pressing Ctrl C. Now I go back to my material here, into my sponge tutorial material, and right here at my triplanar projection, I want to copy this into the file number X, so Ctrl V. To make this work, you have to apply, or you have to add OP and then colon to tell Houdini that this is actually an operation of a COP network, and then it will work. Now, this will not be a color here, so we can say this is a float, and we can set this to raw, because this is what the displacement actually requires. Now we can say copy parameter, and because this is triplanar projection, we also need some textures for our Y direction and for our Z direction. And I will just paste relative references in here. And we'll also change these to raw. And now we are good to go. And now we can start setting up our displacement. Okay, so let's go back here and let's enter our COP network. First of all, I want to create a basic noise or some spikes, because if you take a look at sponges, and I have a few reference images here, they are actually quite spiky. Of course, we all know that they have these holes, but they are quite spiky, and I don't want this to be that spiky, but I want to create some of these spikes at least. So let's go back here and let's see how we can do that. First of all, I want to create a noise. And in this case, I want to use a whirly noise. That creates this pattern by default. I want to change the element size, make it a bit smaller, like so. Maybe jitter it a bit more. And now I want to distort this. So let's add in a distort node. The distort node requires a source, which is actually our distance number 1 here. And you see nothing is happening. And it also requires a direction. And to create the direction, I can use another noise. But this time I want to use a fractal noise. Now the direction requires actually a vector 2 input. It says UV. UV is a vector 2. So you can change the output here, the signature of this fractal, to UV, and then it has the same output. And just connect it in here. And if you increase the scale now on the distort, you see that this will distort our texture. But we have to change a few settings here. So the element size is way too big. So I want to make this smaller. Like so maybe. And I also want to increase the roughness a bit. Yeah, so that we really get a bit of a chaotic noise, something like that. That looks not too bad. Now, if I plug this into my height, let me do this quickly. So let's go to height here. And here the setting is way too high by default. So we have to go in here. Here it is. And set it to 0.01, for example. And I can also plug it directly into my output height, because then we will also see it in our object. But for now, if I go to my preview material, you see what we get here. So this is the displacement that I get. Maybe I can increase this a bit so that it is more obvious. And it doesn't look too bad, but I think that there is not enough detail yet. So let's add in a few more things. I want to add in another noise after the distortion here. So let's create another fractal noise. Let's take a look at that. Here I want to add a little bit more detail. So I could use, for example, a Perlin noise and increase the roughness a bit. And that looks already quite good. Maybe we just change the element size, make it a bit smaller. Something like that. And now we could just multiply these two together. So let's just add in a multiply here. And let's put this in, let's put this in, and then we can go from this one here out to our height fields. Let's take a look what this looks like. And you see now we have a bit more detail in here, which is actually quite good. So if we want, we could now come into this noise here and reduce this maybe a bit more to 0.03. Doesn't look too bad. And if I increase the height here even more, then this should get spike here. Yeah. Now you see we already have some nice spikes. So if we go out now to our object and take a look here, we should see something. But right now we do not see anything. And I think that this has to do with our settings here because the height is set to 0. So in my case, I want to crank this up quite a bit. So let's put 6 in here and let's see what this does. And this should now give us a result already. Oh, I know what I did. Sorry. I connected the wrong value here. So this was the mistake that I made. I connected the bound height, which of course makes absolutely no sense. Oh, and I made the same mistake here. I connected the wrong parameter in the scale actually as well. That's why this is totally wrong, you know. It's not projecting the right way, but now it should work. And you see now it's working because now I finally have the right connection here. And yeah, it looks already quite nice, so not too bad. Now it's time to create these holes that are typical for a sponge. So let's go back to our Copernicus net and let's take a look how we can do that. To create these holes, I want to use a tile pattern. And this is one of my actually really favorite things in Copernicus, so far at least. With the tile pattern, you can do a lot of things. And in my case, I want to create some other shapes. I don't want rectangles, I want circles because I want to create holes. Now, I don't want to create regular holes because, of course, a sponge doesn't have holes that look like that. So we have to jitter these a bit. And there is this option here in the position to uniform jitter these. So let's actually crank this up a little bit. Then we can also change the size. So let's go to this size here. And here's the uniform scale. And instead of uniform, I can say set varying. And now I can actually bring in some variation here. I don't want to go too crazy right now because these will be only the big holes. I will create smaller ones later on a separate layer, on a separate node. And we can play with the seed a bit, maybe do a bit more variation here like so. But these are too many for my taste. So you could come in here now and change the division here, you know, and then they get bigger and more. But in my case, I will stay at 10, but I want to prune some of them. So go to the prune tiles here, and then instead of tile or prune by tile order, we want to do random. And with the random, you get this threshold now. And if I increase it, you see that the more I increase the threshold, the more circles are actually erased. And then I have this seed here, and I can play around with that to get something that looks nice. Let's take a look what I like. I want them to be distributed some kind evenly, you know, something like that. And maybe I have to just change the jitter a bit. Yeah, you know, can do something like that. And this looks already quite nice. Okay, so now I have these holes, but right now they would be very sharp. And they're also not in the right color because I need the dots to be black and the other thing to be white. Otherwise, it doesn't work for our height displacement. So let's first of all invert these. And I will just plug them in directly into my result now. So let's do it like this. Let's use minimum here and plug it in here. And also plug this into my height. Now let's take a look what this does. So you see now these are somehow holes, but doesn't look very good, of course, because they are not really deep and they're very sharp. So this is a bit unnatural. There are a few things that I can do to make this better. First of all, inside the tile pattern node, there is this option to change the drawing or the fill thing. So I can choose distance. And by choosing distance, if you take a look here closely at one of them, if I increase this now, then they get somehow a little bit smoother. And it's not really obvious because we actually have to take a look at this here. So if I increase the distance, you see that I add some kind of a radius here, some kind of a blur. And that's what I want to do. So I just want to add a little bit, not too much here, maybe 0.5. That's enough. Just blur them a little bit out. And I also don't want them to be uniform circles. So I will add in some distortion here. And we did this before up here. So let's just grab this one here and this one and just duplicate this down. And now we can just plug it in here. And the only thing that I have to do now, let me link this up correctly, is to change the distortion noise, because this is of course not what I need here. So I will just reduce this roughness here. And I will increase the element size, quite a bit. Just to give them a slight distortion, something like that. That's actually already enough or too much. I can just scale this down and just distort them a tiny bit so that they are not perfectly round, something like that. This could be my big holes. So now, if we take a look here, still, they are holes, but they are not deep. And the height actually takes in values that are outside of 0 to 1. So I can remap these values now, remap the value of my holes, and just set these to, let's say, -1 to 1. And you see now they get way deeper. And if I plug this now, or if I take a look at the result now, you will see that now we get nice holes. The only thing that you have to be careful about is the remapping. If you do this too much, if you map it too far, then of course you will penetrate the mesh on the other side. So if you set it too high, then this will look strange. And as you see here, we already see some of these, but there are not many. And that has to do with the tiling of our texture. So let's go in here, and instead of 1, let's maybe say that we want to scale this 2 times. Then we just are tiling it more or less 2 times. And this should look a little bit better in a moment. And now for my taste, these holes are actually too small, so I will not use 2, but I will use 1.5. Yeah, I think that this is not too bad. And now I could come in here and even scale this further in. So if I go to my Copernicus here and go to my remap, and instead of -1, I could say -2. You see, now it goes quite far. So it's possible that we now penetrate somewhere our mesh. And you see now these holes are actually looking quite nice. And let's take a look whether we get any problems throughout our mesh somewhere. Actually, I think no, it looks quite good. Okay, now let's add a few more holes here. Therefore, we go back to our COP network. And what I will do now is I will just draw a box around this and call these my big holes. And then I can just duplicate all of them at once, like so. And now I can add in a few more and a few smaller ones. And that's actually really simple now. You just go to the tile pattern and you can just change the divisions. So just increase this here, like so. Then we can go to the prune and maybe reduce this a little bit to get a few more in there. And I could also change the radius here, something like that. And I will also change the seed here, just to have something different here, like that. That's okay. Now let's take a look. If I get all of these together, so again, I will use a minimum here. And first of all, I will just blend these two together. And then we can feed it into this first blend here, and this minimum blend. Now we get this. Let's take a look how this looks like. And I think that this looks pretty good. And at the third layer, I want to add in really small holes. So let's call this my small holes here. And these are the medium ones. Okay. And again, this is pretty straightforward. I just have to come in here and increase the division here quite a bit, maybe to 40, maybe even more, 50. Yeah, that looks quite good. Now let's change this seed here. And let's get rid of a few here. And let's blend these together. So let's take another minimum here. And go like this. And that's what we have now. So let's take a look. Now we have a lot of these holes in there. And we can take a look how it looks on our preview material. Not too bad. And now we can take a look how it looks on our model. So let's go up one level and let's do the render. And you see now we have really a lot of details, but now there is one problem. The remapping is not working. You see now they are exactly as I said before. Now we get this problem that these are actually poking our mesh. And of course we don't want that. So we have to go back in here and play a little bit with the remapping. So it was just too much. Let's say we want to put this to -1.5 and these, we just reduce them. You know, the smaller ones do not have to go in that far to look deeper. So let's just do it like this. And this should fix it. So let's go up one level and render it again. And we still have some problems here. You see here is one is sticking out here. So I should change the scale probably even further. Yeah, let's just reduce it a little bit, just a little bit further so that we don't get these strange artifacts here. Let's just do it like 1.2 and here maybe 0.8. And I think this is okay. So let's take another look. But now I think that this should be fine. Yeah, and it actually looks nice. Okay, perfect. So this is it with this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to learn more, then please subscribe to my channel. And if you want to grab the project file, then please head over to my Patreon. As I said, you can get it with a subscription. You can get it just as a direct purchase. And I will also add a discount code that will be valid for the first customers. Thank you very much for watching. Until the next time, goodbye.